Hello, and welcome to my discussion on Humankind's Ancient Era Wonders. This is going to be part of a series looking at the wonders in each of the different eras in Humankind, at least as we saw them in the closed beta. So this will be 5 parts all the way up through the Industrial Era, talking about the different things that we know about wonders. So let's talk about what we're going to be talking about. So we'll talk about the wonder's unique effects, and this is kind of broken down into 2 different parts. The first is the immediate effects. How useful is the wonder the moment you get it? The second are scaling effects, which is what does the wonder do for me throughout the game? How useful is it going to be later? Another topic we'll talk about is the affinity and the playstyle synergy that the wonder has. And I'll detail some of the better affinity synergies for the wonders, but there's going to be uses for most of the wonders outside of those specific affinities, and some wonders in particular are going to be fairly situational, and when the situation arises, it can maybe work with anything, or it only works with 1 or 2 particular play styles, but it's really strong in those moments, those kind of things. So I just want to detail generally what some of those better synergies are. Also look at some of the cultural synergies, and this is a non-exhaustive list, and it's really just meant to highlight some potential combinations. And generally, I'm not going to highlight the same culture more than once per era because it's fairly unlikely on high difficulties that you'll be able to get more than one wonder per era. But some of the cultures do have multiple different wonder synergies if they could manage to get multiple of them or maybe capture them off an enemy. Finally, I'll talk about combinations with other wonders, and again, the list is non-exhaustive. It's going to depend on the specific game every time, but there are always going to be some synergies that are obvious and stronger than others. One thing to keep in mind is that all wonders provide plus 20 stability and plus 100 fame when you finish them, so I'm not going to talk about those effects specifically for each wonder unless that stability plays into something else that the wonder is doing for you. And these are going to be the symbols that I'll use for the different sort of playstyles and affinities. So we have our usual aesthete, agrarian, builder, expansionist, merchant, militarist, and scientist. You'll notice I also put religious in there, and that's not an affinity. The reason I really did this is because pursuing a religious strategy is something that is fairly viable for a lot of different cultures and can provide you with a lot of great benefits. So I wanted to include religious in case you are pursuing that kind of strategy because it is a viable strategy. And each of these symbols are really going to be used to represent a style of play rather than being that specific affinity necessarily, even though those affinities are generally more suited to that style of play. So, for instance, there are some cultures that are very good at things that aren't related to their affinity. So, like the Greeks are really good at expanding using their hoplites, and in a lot of ways are more akin to a militarist or an expansionist culture than they are to a scientist. So, there are those different things to keep in mind, that these are more, I'm more talking about, okay, if you're settling down and building up your big cities, that's more akin to a builder, even if you're not playing a builder specifically in the era that you're in. So with that out of the way, let's talk about our first wonder, which is the Pyramid of Giza. And the Pyramid of Giza does one thing. It modifies the district industry cost by minus 25%. So this is actually pretty good, particularly because you get it right at the start of the game, which means you are going to be saving industry over the course of the entire game, starting as soon as you finish this wonder. You are always, 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 every single game, going to be building a lot of districts. And as districts scale up in cost, you're really benefiting more and more the later into the game you go, and the more cities that you bring online that are producing more districts. So this creates an obvious affinity for the builder style of play. And right, this one's pretty obvious. Builders are going to be building a lot of districts. The more districts you can get and the faster you can get them, the better your outputs are going to be, the more likely you are to win the game, and the more ability you have to focus that production on something else. The other culture or affinity sort of play style that I think might be overlooked a little bit with the pyramids are going to be the expansionists and militarists, because these two sort of styles and affinities are going to have more cities generally than some of the other players in the game. So what that means is that they're going to have more cities that need to build districts. So they're actually going to get more benefit out of this industry cost modification than most of the other affinities that don't have as many cities that need to produce these districts. So if you're looking to go out and capture a lot of cities early, it might actually be worth considering the Pyramid of Giza if you don't feel like you're going to need the Temple of Artemis, for instance. If you plan to sort of get an advantage early on in the game and then settle down for a bit and really build up your core going into the later game. So as far as cultures go, the pyramid is an obvious synergy with the Egyptians, right? Because the Egyptians get the legacy trait to modify the district industry cost by an additional minus 10%. So you're getting minus 35% industry cost on all your districts, which is just, it's really good. And this can be used to either build up a really strong core early in the game, going for that really tall play style where you get a couple of these really big cities, or the Egyptians can also transition into a militarist or expansionist kind of play style where they get their chariot units online, they kind of go for a bit of a rush, go for a lot of cities, and then use the industry costs that they get from their legacy trait and from the pyramids to really build up those cities astonishingly fast, much faster than other cultures can do it. So the Egyptians have this great synergy for both the builder as well as the sort of more military focus. Another one that perhaps isn't as obvious is the Zhou, and the Zhou get this wonderful bonus where they have +2 stability on all their districts as a legacy trait. What that means for the Zhou is that they're able to build up much larger cities as the game goes on, particularly as they start getting more stability bonuses, because the more districts they have, the more benefit they're getting from their legacy trait. So the Zhou have this wonderful capacity to support larger cities before other people are able to do it, which means you can build more districts, which means you're benefiting from the industry cost reduction more than some of the other cultures. A third is the Achaemenids, and obviously the Achaemenids are an expansionist culture, but really the reason that this works so well with the pyramids, even though they come in the classical era, is that they have this +2 city cap as their legacy trait. And being expansionists themselves, with that +2 city cap, you're much more likely to have a lot of cities. Many, many more so than most other players are going to have at this point of the game. And you can actually support having all those cities because of your higher city cap. So if you're sitting on 5 or 6 cities, while everyone else has 3 cities, you're getting substantially more benefit out of this industry cost modification than the other players are going to get, because you have more of these cities. And this can even be combined with someone like the Egyptians from the previous era. If you've gone for that expansionist Egypt, where you send out your chariots to conquer cities early, you have maybe gone over your city cap a bit. You pick the Achaemenids in the next era, and you have the pyramids, and suddenly you have, 4 or 5 cities that you're sitting on that are ready to just explode out and start constructing all these different districts. The last one I'll bring up is going to be the Italians, and the reason I mention the Italians specifically, even though they're an industrial era culture, is that these commons quarter stability buffs that they give, with plus 10 stability on top of their normal stability modifiers, really enables these massive cities. But not only that, the Italians modify the cost of producing commons quarters by minus 50%, and then the pyramids give you another minus 25% industry cost for all quarters, which includes the commons quarter. So you're getting this massive, massive discount on commons quarters that you can then turn around and churn out a bunch of these. And they're not only counting towards your builder stars when you build them, but they're also enabling you to support more of other districts that you might need. So you can build up these really massive cities with the Italians. And this is sort of similar to the Austro-Hungarians, and they'll synergize as well with the pyramids because of the Opernhaus, which is going to provide a lot of stability and enable these larger cities. But they don't have quite the same level of synergy with the Italians because the Italians want to produce a lot of those commons quarters. So just a shout out to the Austro-Hungarians there. So really the general strategy for the pyramids is that it's going to be better for players that have some production advantages or cultures that can provide stability to support extra districts. And it's going to be good for people that need to, or that have a lot of cities that they need to produce districts in. So particularly sort of early going into the mid-game when you're building up your core cities, it's good for those more expansionists that are sitting on more cities than other players. And really, though, the pyramid is going to be effective for anyone. You can kind of grab it any game and not feel bad about it because you are going to build a lot of districts throughout the game. So if you're playing the Nubians or playing the Mycenaeans or whoever it is, you probably don't feel bad about grabbing the pyramids. So let's talk about the wonder synergies really fast. The first is going to be, that I'll mention specifically, is going to be the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus. So the Mausoleum provides plus 1% science per district. And this comes in the next era, in the classical. So the Mausoleum gives you percent science per district, and the pyramids lets you produce districts faster. Well, it seems pretty obvious what the synergy is here, right? By letting you build more districts with the pyramids more quickly, it allows the Mausoleum to provide you additional science benefits. It's as simple as that. The next one is going to be the Eiffel Tower, and the Eiffel Tower it's just an okay one, and I want to mention it because it provides that extra one industry per population in all cities. I do have a couple issues with the Eiffel Tower that we'll talk about in the appropriate video for the industrial era. But that extra industry per population combined with the industry cost modification on districts does allow you to produce more districts, but it's going to come much later in the game. Finally, I also want to mention St. Basil's Cathedral, because this is sort of similar to the Mausoleum in a way, in that it produces plus 1 faith per district. So if you're pursuing a bit of a faith-based game, and you've been producing a lot of districts due to the benefits that the pyramids have provided you, this is going to help boost your faith based on all those districts. And the additional benefit of St. Basil's compared to the other ones is that it acts as that holy site. So if you've been pursuing that faith-based strategy, you'll get some extra yields out of that. But critically, you'll also get a little extra stability, which will help you also build even more districts. So additionally, really, all holy site wonders kind of do the same thing. They all provide a little bit of extra stability. So if you're really pursuing that tall strategy, where you're trying to build this one giant mega city, probably your capital, any holy site wonder will kind of do. Some are better than others. I think St. Basil's is one that's good enough to warrant talking about specifically, though. So the pyramid overall, it's pretty solid. It's a pretty good wonder. It'll save you quite a bit of industry over the course of the game. Because you get it so early, the amount of industry that you save is actually really good. So the later in the game you go, the more powerful the benefit has to be in order to warrant building the wonder. And the industry cost is something that is always going to be relevant throughout the entire game. So if you can build the pyramids, it's usually worth building. So next, let's talk about the Hanging Gardens. So the Hanging Gardens are a little bit of an odd wonder because it basically serves as a manufactory, which you can't get until later eras. And the manufactory provides +3 money per adjacent market quarter and +5 influence. And it gives all cities an extra yield based on the luxury that you place the Hanging Gardens on, as well as a bit of extra stability. So the Hanging Gardens are something that you place on a resource, a luxury resource, instead of a resource extractor. So one benefit to this specifically is that because you can build a manufactory early in the game, and manufactories are limited to a single one in the world, it means you can secure your manufactory on the luxury resource of your choice that's within your borders before anyone else has the ability to do it. So if there's one really specific benefit that you want and you have that resource in your territory, you're able to claim that benefit before people can do it later in the game. What we don't know about this is how much of that yield you're actually getting, what the yields are. We haven't been able to play with the game that much yet, so we're not sure what the extent of these benefits is going to be. So that makes it a little difficult to talk about. I will also mention that with the Hanging Gardens, normally with a manufactory, you have to control a certain number of those resources before you can build a manufactory. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon means you only need to control one of that resource. You can put it on any resource in your territory. So if you really want marble, for instance, because it provides you additional production on all your cities, but you only have one, it doesn't matter. You can put down the Hanging Gardens on that one marble and secure your manufactory on that, even though you only have access to that one resource, when you would normally need multiple copies in order to build the manufactory later in the game. So synergies are a little difficult to talk about because it's going to really depend on what resources you have in your borders. For an agrarian, for instance, if you have, say, salt or something else that provides you with food, the Hanging Gardens may be a good option, depending on exactly how many extra yields you're getting from that luxury resource. I think the two that are always going to be applicable, though, will be the merchants, because they have a lot of play around resources and trade. So being able to sort of monopolize the extra benefits from one of the resources early, being able to trade away that resource, makes for a sort of obvious affinity with the merchant cultures. And that +3 money per adjacent market quarter, if market quarters see a little bit of a buff, there may be some extra benefits to that. And then the aesthetes, because they have easier diplomatic relationships with others, and they're able to form treaties and alliances more easily, it means you're going to have smoother trade relationships. So whatever you're extracting from the Hanging Gardens is going to be more able to reliably be traded. And the +5 influence will help you get your era stars a little bit, even though it's not a massive boost. So I'm only going to talk about a couple cultures here because it's so dependent on where you're going to start. And the first is going to be the Nubians, because the Nubians are this commercial culture and they want to trade anyway. So having that Hanging Garden acting as a manufactory, giving you that resource, helps you have that extra resource to trade. But the Nubians also get the +4 money on luxury resource deposits that they have an extractor on, so you're going to get a little bit of extra benefit from that as well. And overall, it'll help you just get the stuff that you want to get anyway, but also give you a little stability and the extra fame you get from building any wonder. The other one I wanted to talk about actually is the Achaemenids, and these are expansionists. And I know I already mentioned them, but the Achaemenids, because they have so many cities in the classical era, it means that the extra yields you're getting from the luxury that you built this on is applying to all your cities. So the wider you build, the more benefit you get from the Hanging Garden, and the Achaemenids have this capacity to be really, really wide really early in the game. So having a lot of cities means more benefit, it means extra stability. So the Hanging Garden's potentially an option if you're looking to play the Achaemenids later in the game. So really, this is possibly useful for any affinity or playstyle, but again, it depends on your access to resources and the scale of the benefit of those resources, which we don't really know yet. It's not something we've been able to test very reliably. The extra yields are going to be more impactful the wider your empire is, which is why I mentioned the Achaemenids. But later cultures have plenty capacity to build these really wide empires, particularly as the technologies come online to give you more city cap. Unfortunately, I don't really have any particular synergies for the Hanging Gardens here because it's really just a manufactory that you get online earlier. It's kind of expensive to produce. So unfortunately, I don't have any specific synergies with other wonders for the Hanging Gardens. And in my opinion, the Hanging Gardens are really kind of a consolation prize if you can't get any of the other wonders in this era. Like, it's okay, but honestly, I'd feel kind of bad picking this one if any of the other options are available. And a lot of the time, you're probably going to be better off holding your influence to the next era to try to grab a different wonder. So, Hanging Gardens of Babylon, from what we know about it so far, overall, I'd rate it pretty low, even though I'm not doing a tier list here. So next we have Stonehenge, and Stonehenge does a lot of stuff. So it gives you plus 10 food for co-religion estates, plus 5 stability per co-religion estates. On the capital, the plus 5% food and plus 5 stability on the capital of empires following the same religion, and it acts as a holy site, which gives you the plus 20 faith and plus 20 stability. Plus, if you have chosen any religious tenets that provide extra yields on your holy sites, it'll also provide you with those yields. So, Stonehenge overall is something that is fairly versatile for anyone that is focusing on religious-based gameplay, but specifically, it's going to be really good for people that are both focusing on religious gameplay, as well as building building an empire that is really tall. Because Stonehenge kind of concentrates a lot of outputs in one place. So whereas the pyramids give you a benefit across your entire empire, or the Hanging Gardens with the extra stability and yield you get from the luxury resource provides you an extra benefit across your entire empire, the Stonehenge really only provides you a benefit in the city in which you place it. So what this means is that if you, say, take the Olmecs and you're building a really tall city, the Stonehenge will enable you to really build that city up very, very, to a very large level, to a very high level, to support a lot of districts, because the stability you're getting from this, from the base 20 stability from a wonder, plus 20 stability from holy sites, and plus 5 stability per co-religion estate. So you can support a lot of districts just with Stonehenge alone. And then the additional food you're getting is going to allow you to support higher population as well. So affinities with Stonehenge, first, most obvious, are going to be religious, right? And really, more holy sites and faith is better for religious sort of play style. And Stonehenge does everything you want. It gives you faith, it gives you extra yields for having a strong faith that has spread to other empires that are nearby. So overall, great for people that are focusing on a religious playthrough. The other one is going to be builders, and builders really benefit from this because this provides such a large amount of stability to support districts, and it's going to give you a little bit of food to help support pops if you have a decently strong religion. And builders can struggle a little bit with food if they focus too much on just continually building makers' quarters, which I've found myself inclined to do, as well as many other people. So builders, they can get a decent use out of this because it's going to help boost up what they want to do by supporting more districts, but also sort of help support one of their weak points, which is food generation. I wanted to mention the agrarians because I think Stonehenge is probably the wonder you're going to build if you can choose one as the agrarians, like the Harappans, and you'll get some benefit from it out of the Celts as well. But you're generally going to make less use of the stability compared to builders, and the food you're getting from Stonehenge is generally going to be less impactful than just having your emblematic quarter. Perhaps an exception might be the Harappans. If you have a strong faith early on in the game, you can get a decent amount of food. But like the Namaten and some of the other buildings that you get later, as the Haudenosaunee, for instance, or the Mexicans, just dwarfs the food that you get from Stonehenge. So overall, I think Stonehenge is okay for agrarians. It seems like the most obvious synergy, but in my opinion, it's just kind of okay. So let's talk about cultures. And the first I want to mention is the Olmecs. And this is for two reasons, right? They kind of have a little bit of that agrarian synergy because the Olmec heads get the food yields. But really the main reason I wanted to talk about the Olmecs is because the extra influence that they generate when they're picking a religion allows them to pick polytheism instead of shamanism because they don't need that extra influence generation. So that means they're getting extra faith earlier in the game, which lets them reach tenets earlier, and it lets them spread their religion more quickly to other cultures, which means that you're going to be getting the co-religionist states boosts sooner than other people are going to. And you're going to have pick of the litter when it comes to choosing the tenets that you want. So the Olmecs are actually really good with Stonehenge. Another to bring up are going to be the Mayans. So the Mayans, perhaps not the strongest religious culture in this era, in the classical, but the Mayans have two things, well, really one thing that has multiple effects going for them, which is the Kunat, or emblematic quarter. And the emblematic quarter encourages you to build this sort of really tall city with a lot of attached territories, which Stonehenge plays into quite a bit. It gives that extra stability, and by concentrating yields in one city, encourages that really tall play style. But the Kunat also provides a little bit of faith as well to help support your religious spread. So the Mayans will get a lot of benefit out of Stonehenge being a builder. They get that extra stability to help support more attached outposts, to help support more districts. The Kunat is going to give you that extra production per territory that you have in the city where you're building the emblematic quarter. So Stonehenge overall, good for builders in general, really good for the Mayans specifically. Another one to mention is the Umayyads, and the Umayyads don't have any specific benefits to generating faith. But the Umayyads are another culture that promotes a set of really tall cities. They get extra, their legacy trait gives them extra science per territory, but really what you're interested in this sort of setup is a grand mosque, which is going to give you science per territory on the city. So if you can take the Mayans into the Umayyads, where you have this big tall city with a lot of territories and a lot of districts supported by Stonehenge, perhaps another wonder, then you can generate a ton of production and a ton of science on just this really small set of cities. And Stonehenge plays into that play style really well by allowing you to supercharge a single city. Finally, I'll mention the Mughals as another one. And the Mughals really, it comes down to the extra production that you're going to generate on your capital based on your sphere of influence. So as your culture spreads, your influence spreads throughout the world, you generate additional production on your capital. And because if you've played Stonehenge and perhaps you've taken the Mayans or the Umayyads and you've gone for this tall playstyle, the Mughals can really help you charge up your capital to these really extreme levels if you have a strong culture game. So the Mughals will be able to churn out really massive amounts of units, of districts, of whatever it is they need in their capital, which Stonehenge helps support. I'll also briefly mention the British, even though I don't have them here, because they're another one that provides a big bonus to their capital for both money and science. But they are expansionists, so they're not as likely to have like this big giant set of cities. Rather, they're going to have many. But the British do encourage having a really big capital. The other ones are going to be the Teutons, Spanish, and Ottomans, because they all have this really large faith output, and they can really pursue that sort of holy site-based strategy, which Stonehenge plays into a bit. But those empires are more likely to be going out and conquering, so they're not playing as much into the tall play style, and I think those three have a better synergy with another wonder we're going to talk about here. So the general strategy here is really that Stonehenge is good for empires that are playing a strong faith game, right? And they're going for a really tall capital because the benefits are concentrated. So the wonder synergies that Stonehenge has are going to be Angkor Wat, right? And this one's obvious. +1 food per faith, so you're already generating extra faith from Stonehenge. You've likely already pursued some additional ways to generate faith throughout the eras. So you can get a lot of food on your capital by combining Stonehenge with Angkor Wat and some other faith generation. And this allows you to sort of condense some of the construction you have to do. You're not going to need as many agrarian quarters, which is going to allow you to focus on other things. And again, the Angkor Wat as a holy site also is going to give you those additional benefits from your tenets that you've chosen throughout the eras. So Angkor Wat and Stonehenge both encourage these really sort of tall play styles focused around religion, synergized together really well. Once again, the mausoleum comes up as well, because with a tall play style, the mausoleum comes in very nicely and is going to help you boost your science output. On a tall city, you're going to have a lot of districts, which means that you're going to be getting greater benefits of that extra science per district. So overall, Stonehenge, pretty good. Probably going to be your pick if you are going for a taller playstyle compared to the other wonders of the era. I'll also mention that very briefly that really all the holy site wonders are a good combination with Stonehenge because you can stack all those holy site bonuses. So if you're pursuing a strategy for your religion where you're trying to get a lot of, say, science or money or whatever on your holy sites, the more holy sites you have, the more of that output you're going to get. So depending on your strategy, specifically, really any of these wonders can serve you well. And it might be worth picking up any of them if they're available, if you get the opportunity to do so. So next, let's talk about the Temple of Artemis. So the Temple of Artemis gives extra health regeneration on units. Units ignore movement penalties from forests, and much like Stonehenge, it acts as a holy site. So you get that plus 20 faith and plus 20 stability, and you get the benefits of any tenets that affect holy sites. So this gives a lot of obvious synergies with religious cultures that are going to be focused on conquest and expansion. So again, more holy sites and faith is going to be better for cultures that are really focusing on that religious style of play. So this is great for that. Even if you're not a militarist or expansionist, the religious holy sites is going to still be useful to you. And the plus 10 health regeneration, even if you're not attacking, might still be useful on defense. And it can be useful to even deny that to an opponent if that's a concern. But this can serve as a backup even if you're playing peacefully and you didn't manage to grab Stonehenge and you still want to pursue that holy site strategy. Temple of Artemis can serve as a decent second choice, even though it's not as beneficial as Stonehenge for that sort of tall style of play. For the sort of militarist expansionist playstyle, the Temple of Artemis allows you to heal more quickly and move more quickly through enemy territory because you ignore those movement penalties from forests. And because you're getting that extra health regeneration, every time you capture a city or win a battle, it means you can move out faster. So it gives you a bit of an advantage in wartime because you're able to bring your armies back up to full health and get them back into the field more quickly, which gives your enemy less time to respond. So let's talk about a couple of cultures. And here I have the Mycenaeans. Really, any sort of the early militarist and expansionist cultures can benefit from the Temple of Artemis. If you're going to build a wonder as, say, the Mycenaeans or the Hittites or the Assyrians, the Temple of Artemis is probably going to be the one that you build, but you could also make an argument for the pyramids. In either case, obviously the Mycenaeans, very competent, early militarists, able to take maybe a city or two early off the enemies, or off their enemies, and the Temple of Artemis, with their extra health regeneration, obviously helps. But the reason I chose the Mycenaeans in particular is because with the Promachoi, they get that combat strength bonus on their first turn in combat. And being able to ignore movement penalties in forests means that they're more able to utilize that. They're less likely to be halted due to movement penalties where they can't reach their enemy to make use of that first turn combat strength bonus. And because their units are not like chariots or cavalry like the Hittites and Assyrians, it enables them to move across the world a little bit faster. Also, the Mycenaeans, because they have that 25% production bonus for units, they have a little bit of extra production to spare compared to some of the other cultures in the era. It's not a lot, but if any of the expansionists or militarists can really afford to take a wonder, it's probably going to be the Mycenaeans. Now let's talk about a bit of a stronger synergy, in my opinion, which is the Morians. I don't think there's a super strong case for like a really excellent combination in the ancient era. I think the Temple of Artemis is actually a little bit better with some of the later cultures, and the Morians are one of them. Because the Morians are going to get plus 10 science and plus 10 faith for independent people under their patronage, which means the Morians actually have a fairly strong religious game when they enter into the classical era. Because at the classical era, there are lots of independent people, and it's pretty likely that you have a few of them under your patronage. So you don't have to build any districts at all to have a pretty reasonable faith output, which is going to help you expand your religion and pick your tenets, and the Temple of Artemis is going to benefit from that, as well as providing you some extra faith that you need. But also, the Morians have what you could potentially argue is the best emblematic units in their era, which also makes them competent militarists and expansionists that are able to go out and conquer enemies. So the health regeneration and the ignoring the movement penalties in forests is something that can actually really benefit them. So the Morians benefit from every aspect of the Temple of Artemis. And if you plan to pick the Morians, I don't know if it's worth it necessarily to think, oh, I need the Temple of Artemis because I want to pick the Morians in the next era. But if you do have it, it is going to provide you some really nice benefits to your culture. Sort of in a similar vein are going to be the Teutons. The Teutons are going to get the earliest emblematic quarter that provides you extra faith per district or per population. The Kaiserdom gives it +1 faith per district. So they have a really strong religious game earlier than other cultures can get it. You're going to be producing a lot of faith, which plays into picking more tenets more quickly. But they're also very competent expansionists as well, and they're going to be looking to expand early into the game. So they really combine their religious affinity with their militarist sort of play style, or their expansionist sort of play style. And the Teutonic Knights get bonuses against enemies of a different religion. The Teuton's legacy trait gives them money and gold for the religious followers that they have. So getting more faith is going to increase the amount of other guilds that you get. So the Temple of Artemis, again, as a holy site, that's giving you faith. It's giving you the health regeneration. It's letting you ignore movement penalties on forests. Benefits everything that the Teutons want to do. So, again, fairly strong synergy. I'm going to talk about a couple of these in the same vein, the Ottomans and the Spanish, because it's largely the same sort of story with them as the Teutons. They just come an era later. So the Ottomans and the Spanish both get quarters that are going to give them extra faith either per population or per district within their cities. So again, they're fairly strong sort of religious adjacent cultures that are able to get up their tenets. Like the Teutons, and I didn't mention this before because I wanted to mention it for all three of them, that extra faith, you're getting into the point of the game where you're going to be able to pick that the last religious tenet that gives you +2 combat strength on your units. So having that extra faith generation, having that the extra faith from the Temple of Artemis helps you get up to that earlier because that's probably going to be your prime pick. And then you can combine that with the extra health regeneration and ignoring the movement penalties in forests to really create this fairly mobile, dangerous army corps that can get places really fast, that can recover from battles more quickly, and get on the march again and threaten your enemy. Finally, I also wanted to mention the British, and this is specifically because of the Redcoat. The Redcoat is a unit that can regenerate in enemy territory, so there's a little bit of synergy with the extra health regeneration. I would never build the Temple of Artemis to specifically play into the British. It's just too late. I don't think you can really plan that far ahead. Your needs are going to change as the game goes on. But if you do have the Temple of Artemis, it is nice to have when you're playing with Redcoats. It's really the general strategy with the Temple of Artemis. It's most useful for people that are playing a religious game that is supplemented with a militarist or expansionist kind of playstyle. Obviously the Teutons sort of most directly play into that, but you do have some other cultures that do as well. I think the Temple of Artemis might be perhaps the most niche of the wonders of this era, um, because of the benefits it provides. But that, I don't think that makes it the weakest necessarily. I would still perhaps place that on the Hanging Gardens, because in the situations the Temple of Artemis is useful, it does provide you some fairly decent benefits. But I would still argue that Stonehenge and pyramids are probably the premier wonders of the era. So very quickly, a couple of the synergies for the Temple of Artemis. First is the Forbidden City. Because if you've built the Temple of Artemis, you are probably planning on going to war a fair bit to make use of that extra health regeneration. The Forbidden City lets you do it more often. That plus 25 war support gain for going to war means you don't have to wait for all your grievances to fill up. Means you don't have to wait for all that war score to generate from the extra grievances. You can just keep going and going and going and fighting and fighting and fighting. And particularly when it's combined with like a militarist culture that gets additional war supports that they get when going to war, means you can be declaring wars just constantly. And the more wars you're in, the more use you're going to get out of that extra health regeneration on units. Another one, though perhaps a bit of a weaker synergy, is going to be the Lighthouse of Alexandria. So this gives some extra vision on your units, both on land and at sea. So it's going to let you make more effective use of your armies. You can see farther ahead of other people. You can know where to go if you need to avoid an enemy or bring up reinforcements. It gives you a little bit of extra intel to make better use of your units. But I think where it's really going to be good, it will be on more water-based kind of maps, where you have a lot of naval units. So the lighthouse is going to give you that extra combat strength and that extra movement speed. But on the naval maps, if you have the Temple of Artemis as well, it means that your navy can regenerate more quickly in order to get back into battle. So in those niche scenarios where there's a big water map, you have a bunch of islands or a big archipelago or something like that, the Temple of Artemis and Great Lighthouse should make a pretty decent combination. And again, because it is a holy site, it does have some synergies with all the other holy sites if you're pursuing that holy site yield strategy. It's not as good as Stonehenge in most scenarios, but it's okay as a backup if you couldn't take Stonehenge and you still want to pursue that religious-based strategy. So overall, Temple of Artemis, a little bit more niche than some of the others, but still an okay choice overall. So with that, that concludes my discussion of these ancient era wonders for humankind. Although this isn't a tier list, I would say that at the moment I would rate the pyramids or Stonehenge at the top, with the temple somewhere behind them and the Hanging Gardens at the bottom. I'm sure my opinion on this will change as time goes on, but I feel like I haven't been able to play enough with the wonders to really be able to rate them. And a few of them are a little more situational than others, and the Hanging Gardens in particular, we don't have enough information on how many extra yields a manufactory provides to really judge it effectively, I think. So let me know what you think about what I've said about the different wonders, if there are perhaps some different play styles that work really well with these wonders that I didn't discuss, or if you feel like something that I said was incorrect or maybe glossed over something, or if you agree. So I hope you'll tune in next time. I'll be talking about the classical era wonders next, and then eventually getting up all the way through the industrial era. So I'll see you next time.